Welcome back to another episode of Just Another Autism Podcast. I'm Eileen Lamb, and today my guest is Scott LeRette. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Scott is an author, and he recently got his New York Times bestseller book adapted into a movie. It's called Unbreakable Boy, and it's about his son, Austin. It's a true story. Austin has autism and brittle bone disease, and this is their story. So I'm really excited to be speaking to Scott today. Scott is also a member of Autism Speaks Team 20. He's a fierce advocate, father, and so much more. So welcome, Scott. Hi, Scott, and thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's all my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
Well, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about Austin and maybe his diagnosis and all of that?
Well, Austin he's 30 years old and he lives with us. He's always lived with us. We're his guardians. And he started out, I guess, when he was around 10 years old, and things have changed so much in 20 years, my goodness. But he went through ADD, ADHD, ODD, OCD, PDD, NOS, and then finally he got Asperger's, and today it's of course he's autistic. I don't know what you even consider it anymore. There are so many different forms, and now there are levels of autism, 1, 2, 3. Some of these things I don't even know, and I think I'm barely educated. But when he was about 10 or 11, he never spoke with a lot of animation, and we lived in the South, and it was really interesting because Logan spoke like a little Southern boy. For example, the word Bill, Bill. In the South, it's a two-syllable word, Beal. And Logan would say that, but Austin would not. And we had a doctor point that out to us, and Austin was just so monotone in everything he did. And that was just one of several things that happened. At recess at daycare, he would prefer to be with the teachers or younger kids. He had issue with his peers, and it's not that he didn't like them or not like them. He preferred to be with the people in charge. And it was actually an article in Time magazine that my wife was shown by our next door neighbor and said, I think Austin's autistic. That's how it happened 20 years ago. To some people. And I didn't want to believe it. I was the typical in denial. However, I'm not the typical guy. I stayed because we know all about autism and special needs and its effect on the divorce rate and things like that. And it's kind of crazy that we'll be married 31 years this year. But anyway, it just, Austin is verbal. He's social to a fault. I always say it that way. It's over the top. And I have a good friend that also has a really popular podcast on autism, and he has 3 autistic children. And we were just talking about things back and forth. And he said, some of the things you deal with, because Austin doesn't know how to stop talking. He's it's pathology. He seriously does not know how to stop. And he said, some of the things you deal with I think they may be more challenging than some of the things that my nonverbal, son deals with. And I understood what he was saying because people think that when they see Austin, that he's this bright and cheery and full of energy and exciting and loving kid, like, what's wrong with him? He looks normal. And it's but we have days where Teresa and I both want to run away, and because it's just so challenging, so difficult. So you understand this, but so many people just can't appreciate it, no matter how much you tell them.
Yeah, unless you live it, it's hard to understand. What are some of the behaviors now that Austin is an adult that he's still facing?
Well, Austin, a lot of it has to do with his sensory levels. And if he's overwhelmed, overstimulated, it really gets to him. It could result in a seizure. Like when we were on a trip recently, he had actually one of his worst seizures. He doesn't have grand mal seizures. I guess you would call them petit mal seizures, but We can tell when he's going to have one, but he was overwhelmed. His stimming and in words, there's certain phrases he says or screeches, and but in terms of his behaviors and what he does, that he has these words and screeches, and he'll just go on. And like right now, I just said, honest, Austin, please, I'm going to be on this call. Go be yourself, but don't be yourself, because he's next door. And it wouldn't be uncommon for him to, no matter what I say, he's probably going to pop his head in the door and wonder who you are.
He's welcome to say hi.
He will. So, but it's different though, because he can talk and he can communicate, and he can take care of himself. He can go to he can go to the bathroom, but it doesn't say how clean his bathroom is. But he can do some of these things that, we're blessed that he's able to do.
Do you think that becoming Austin's dad changed you? I mean, not just as a parent, as a dad, but as a person?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you understand my story though, I've been sober, almost 20 years, and that was a big impetus for my entire story coming out. And, someone asked me a few years ago, well, what if Austin wasn't autistic? And I, it, it's a question. I mean, it's a hypothetical, which I think is silly, but how do you answer that? This has essentially been our life for 30 years, and our empty nest is three people. And one of my life's missions, and I'm really digging deep to find out what I can do, but it's finding living situations for kids and adults like Austin, because he wants to be out of our house more than we want him out. Um, because he wants a girlfriend. He wants to be living independently, and it would be semi-independently. And in my experience right now, what exists is either you have a lot of money that enable you to do something privately or whatever, or it's the group homes. And to Austin, that's a dirty word, and I understand that. But my point is that, and good and well, this is a fact, but when kids turn 18/21, so many services just disappear. They're just gone. And then you have wait lists. And we're going to Oklahoma next week. I'm speaking to the state IDD, and they made that a priority in their state. And there were certain services that took 13 years to get, and they've gotten that number down to 3 years. And their goal is to get it to zero wait time. And we've got a list here in Nebraska that we were on that we got bumped off of, and we were back on again. And at one point, we just kind of gave up on it. But services for those on the spectrum, um, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah,
It's
there's so much that needs to be done, and it depends on the state too. I know here the waiting lists are horrible to get, like just a Medicaid waiver. My son Charlie was on the waiting list. It was 25 years. So he would have been like 30. And the only reason he got access to the waiver um, at 11 last year is because he was at risk of being institutionalized. So he got what's called a diversion spot. So he bypassed the 25-year waiting list. But basically, unless you're like so severe that you need it now or you're going to be institutionalized, you wait 25 years in Texas, and that's just not okay.
Yeah, but what do you do though? I mean, I don't know. It's just that's why I say I'm really focusing hard and trying to do something. And I mean, I think I'm dialed in, and I know you are too. I know who you work for and what you do, and but then I see some parents that have children on the spectrum that they don't know what an IEP is. And maybe not for any fault of their own, but I get asked this question a lot when giving advice, and at the most basic level, that's the first thing I tell a family, parents to do is take control of your child's IEP. It's a legal and binding document that you have absolute control over, and some folks don't even know what it is. But we batted a lot of heads when we were in high school, junior high and high school with Austin. But a part of me thinks that every single student in school should have an IEP.
So back to your story though. You've said that Austin joy is unfiltered.
Hmm.
What's the last moment he made you laugh unexpectedly?
He shaved his head the other day, and he didn't. He's wanted to do it because he wants to. He's like, I just want to be like you, Dad. I'm like, oh, come on. No, you don't. You have a funny shaped head. You don't want a bald head. Apparently, I've got a fairly okay shaped head, but he doesn't. But he came in where I was the other day in the room, and he had this chunk shaved out of his head, and I'm like, oh. But it's he did that 3 4 days ago, and it's shaved now, and it looks fine. And I'm like, whatever, it'll grow back. It's not a big deal. But then last night he came in our room and said, now I'm going to grow a mullet.
Oh,
So he's ready to grow it out. I'm like, okay, well, you got about 24 months or whatever it'll take to get there. But you know, there are times where he just is so infuriating, but then he'll say something or do something that you can't help but just laugh. Now, I find it, to me, it's interesting because with the movie coming out, there have been some critics in the autism world that have said, it's a story about this dad who gets to feel better about himself because his broken kid makes him feel good. And um, it was just something I want to ask you a little bit about too, but because it really bothers me that, especially from those of us within the community, that, you know, I'm not going to judge someone's child's experience, just like I wish they wouldn't judge mine or Austin's, because there are days where Austin believes his autism is a superpower. And then there are days where I'm on some of the dad support groups on Facebook, reading some of the posts of some of the dads that are about ready to just, they can't go on in life because it's so difficult. Um, but Austin will tell you on days that he feels it's a superpower, but then he'll go on a day later and say something that, again, some of us in the community think is so bad and so wrong that, oh, we're not broken, we don't need fixed. Well, guess what? Austin, in between tears and maybe after a seizure, will look at me and say, why did God do this to me? If I could have a pill today, I'd take it, Dad. So that's my point. I've got critics, fine, whatever. But don't you dare point your finger at me and judge me for my son's experience, because that's his experience and he's living it. And I've tried showing that. So there are days with Austin that are just beautiful. And then there are moments where I just feel so lost and so unable to help him because I know it just hurts his heart and he can't figure it out sometimes.
the lowest point in your journey, and how did you get through it? Because there are a lot of challenges, it seems.
Well, my lowest point was that last. I don't know if you've read my book or seen the movie, but um, the last night I drank, and that was the worst moment of my life, most shameful moment, which I talk about it, but it still doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. I hate talking about it, but I'll talk about it anytime. But um, we have a good life. I mean, what the lowest point, in the last 30 years, gosh, nothing that would make me say, I'm pulling the plug, or nothing. I'm always a half glass full guy. So it's always it's more a roller coaster. I don't think there's anything that's so far down that would say I'm struggling to actually answer your question, because I've had a couple horrible moments in my life, but over the last 30 years, they were small, horrible moments. Nothing that is just like Austin was at a certain place where we couldn't do it, and we deal with that all the time. So that's the only answer I got for you.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So, can you talk to us a little bit about the book and the movie? Like what was it like to turn your book into a movie? I mean, not a lot of people get to do that.
No, it's pretty crazy. And I had a friend of mine that I worked with for years, and he was the head of HR for NBC Universal, and he actually described the numbers to me one time, and he ended up saying that in 2022 there were 100 and about almost 120,000 screenplays presented to the Writers Guild of America, WGA. Of those, 114 got made. And he just went through and he actually whiteboarded it and showed me, because on top of that, I mean, a best-selling book that's turned into a major motion picture with one of the big studios and actually makes it onto the big screen. Um, Especially today, um, greater than 80% of all films don't go to the big screen. They go to streaming or pay-per-view or whatever other home entertainment vehicle there is. So maybe higher than 80%. But so it's kind of a big deal. And I, I understand that. I don't take it for granted at all. But I also, was just writing notes to myself in my little notebook, almost more than 15 years ago. And it was my own self-induced therapy, and it wasn't for anybody else. It was totally for my own selfish purposes. Same with my blog. My blog at one point was called Autistic, and I think one of the stories in there made it onto Autism Speaks website. I wrote one for Autism Speaks probably 10 years ago, and it just became a journey, and I didn't know it was going to turn into a book. And then once there was a little flicker of flame of, this could be a book. People like the stories. They're funny, they're pitiful, they're sad, they're hilarious. And but all along I thought my family should be a TV show. That was my thinking all along. I was thinking This Is Us, Wonder Years, and I totally thought about that. And I'm a huge dreamer, and all I thought of was every actor that wanted to play whatever role and who it would be. Um, and then when HarperCollins published the book, I was very happy, and it was distributed. That was the main thing they did, was distribution, which was wonderful. But I knew they weren't going to do anything with the theatrical rights, so I learned the legal process to get my theatrical rights back. There's a form called a quit claim. I followed the process. I followed the structure of it and emailed it to them, and within an hour, I had my theatrical rights back. And they didn't, of course, know that I was going to make a movie with Lionsgate. I didn't either, but here we are. And obviously, becoming dear friends with the Hollywood stars, was a big win for me in terms of making things happen. But at that point, I was with an independent film company, and I became friends with Peter over about a year's time. So we didn't do anything together for over a year until I fired the independent film company. And then here we are today. There's a lot more in there, of course.
Worked out. That's awesome. Did you get to be involved in the entire process, or was there like anything like in the adaptation that like surprised you, something that felt different from how you lived it?
No, people ask the question all the time about the authenticity, and the it was so accurate. There were some little things like the kids were born in first better part of a decade they were in North Carolina, and they moved to Iowa, and now we're in Nebraska. But the film was filmed and took place in Oklahoma. Connection is that Oklahoma has great incentives, and there are lots of films being done there in Oklahoma. And I also graduated from Oklahoma. I went to OU. But there are things that happened in Iowa, things that happened in North Carolina, and there was one that maybe happened in 2018 and something happened in 2010. There were two events, but they were very similar events, and they were made into one event because the age of the kids didn't really matter as much as the intent of the story. And um, there's one scene where there's a skateboard that's used, and in reality, it's an Easter basket. And so there's some little minor differences, and nothing that even folks that really know us are going to look at it and go, yeah, gosh, that was so on the money. I'm very happy with the accuracy of it. It was fun though because John is the current writer and director for The House of David, which is airing right now on Prime. It's the number one series on Prime right now. He's, I think, just finishing in Greece on season two, but he wrote and directed The Unbreakable Boy. And for about 6 months, he would talk to us either via FaceTime, email, text, or phone calls because prior to him writing a single word, he wanted to get as much about us right as possible in terms of the accuracy, and it was a lot of fun. Even the actors, there were actors that would call us and talk to us. Zach would talk to me about certain things, or would I say this, or would I not say it this way, and then Austin spent a lot of time with Jacob Laval. They FaceTimed all the time, and his performance as Austin is just it's spectacular. I wish that he could get noticed for that because his adapt his portrayal of Austin is just it's smoking. It's so good.
And on that note, your book was named Unbreakable. The movie is named Unbreakable.
Right.
Has this word taken another meaning to you now?
Well, it's Unbreakable Boy, but I think that I leave it to people to really think about, who is the Unbreakable Boy?
Right. That's
Is it
kind of what
Austin?
I'm
Everybody
doing.
assumes it's Austin. And everybody assumes it's a person, or is it really just something in here? Is it a state of mind? It really doesn't matter. Because that's what the movie's for. I hope that people go in and walk out and feel something in their own heart that they saw in their own life. Something was touched because of something we did or didn't do, or they saw in the film they could relate to. And the same thing for there's a character in the film called Joe. You'll understand when you watch it. But and they want to know who Joe really is. And that's another one where that's totally up to the person watching. Yeah, figure out who Joe is.
From my perspective, I was wondering, so who is the Unbreakable Boy? Are we talking about Austin or are we talking about the dad?
Yeah, and there are people that have given me grief because they're like, "Oh my gosh, this film is so much more about Scott, and I thought this was an autistic story about a boy." And I'm like, "Okay, I can see where you would get that based on the cover but I don't know. Marketing does things for whatever reasons they do things, and could it have been, positioned a little more differently? I don't know. But the thing, in the end, though, it's based on a memoir, and a memoir, you know what a memoir is, and it's my memoir. So it's a book about my life. So that's all I would say to people is that what do you think you were reading? You weren't reading Austin's memoir.
I have one last question for you, and it's a fun one, and you might not have an answer.
Okay.
What's one thing that Austin does that should become a viral trend?
Um, well, it could be a saying. Um, he he says to everyone he meets, well, before he tells them who they look like, what actor, because that's a salutation for him. That's how he introduces himself. He would tell you who you look like. Um, but then when he leaves, he'll normally say, "You owe me $1."
The service of telling you who you look like?
No, I think it's from a movie because his knowledge of movies and music is pretty crazy. But there's an old movie, and he loves The Big Lebowski. The Big Lebowski is his favorite film, and but he picked that up, and he will always say that, "You owe me $1." And he got in trouble for that once at work because a patron at the movie theater he works at had said that Austin had asked them for money. And
That
you know what it is with, autistic persons with sarcasm and dry humor and reading between the lines. A lot of the times those things are really difficult, and he can be kidding about something, and the other person takes it literally. And so that we figured out that's what happened. So he had this little complaint against him, but it was Austin because anybody he meets, "You owe me $1." And so, yeah, gosh, there's so many things. His hat can become viral. He wears the
okay.
hat all the
Same
time.
one from the film, from the movie.
They made a custom one for the film, and I think we're getting that, which is really cool. But the one that's on the cover is, I think that's the one that's on the cover of the book. The old book was his because that's a picture of him on the original book. Um, the new book cover and the poster and everything and the movie is a custom one.
Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
yes, it's really refreshing to get the dad perspective because I get a lot of moms and I think dads are a little more reserved usually. So hearing from a dad is really
Yeah,
awesome.
that's interesting. That's fascinating you say that though, because my friend Rob, I think you've met Rob. Yeah,
Yeah,
you.
I know, Rob, of course.
He, of course, I don't know what I was thinking there. He told me once that the majority of his followers are mothers.
Yeah, I think there's something about dad and being vulnerable and opening up about these things that is more difficult, you know? So maybe some
Yeah.
stigma about men and feelings and being open. I don't know, but I appreciate it. Actually, do you have any words for dads out there?
For dads, I
Raising
just
a child on the spectrum?
just be there. I mean, that would be the number one thing. Just be there. I mean, you've got to be the advocate for your child because no one else is going to do it for you. It's just that no one else, and it shouldn't be that way, or it should be that way. No one else should be your child's advocate. You should be, and whether you're a mother or a father, be the person that's the advocate for your child. Looking out for number one. Well, that child is your number one, and if you're not going to be the advocate, then there's no rudder. They're not going to go anywhere. If you're not going to be the one that's going to do it for them, so they need you.
Love it. Thank you so much, Scott.